Welcome everyone. My name is Liz Aparicio and I'm here with my colleague Mo-Yi Lee, and we are so delighted that you all have joined us today for our first of two webinars on the job market. So today's presentation is entitled Winding Pathways to the Tenure Track. I'm glad that you're here. Our second webinar will be in about 3 weeks, actually I think just exactly 3 weeks from today, and it's called Making a Difference: Alternative Positions Beyond the Tenure Track. Just want to acknowledge our sponsors, the Society for Social Work and Research, SSWR-GADE Research Capacity Development Committee, as well as the Group for Advancement of Doctoral Education in Social Work. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's session, so please go ahead and turn off your video unless you're a panelist. And please only use the chat function to be able to talk. We did send out a request for folks to send in questions in advance, so we'll be going through those first. But if we have time for other questions, we'll definitely get to those too. So feel free to send me a chat if you'd like to have your question addressed as we go through the presentation, and we'll come to them. You can change your name if you would like to by hovering over the top right-hand corner of your picture and clicking on those 3 dots up there. You can add your pronouns, you can add a different name, whatever you would prefer to do. I am delighted to let you know that we have 4 wonderful panelists today. So we have Jennifer Bellamy from University of Denver, Amanda Geller from UC Irvine, Seok Won Jin from University of Memphis, and Abigail Williams-Butler from Rutgers University. So we are going to start today with a wonderful presentation by Dr. Lee. So Mo-Yi Lee will give us some framing information that'll be helpful to you in your considerations of applying for both tenure track positions and positions that may lead to the tenure track. Our goal with this webinar series is really to help you envision all the range of opportunities available to you. You have amazing training that you've gotten over these last couple of years and then all throughout your life leading up to this point. And so we're really hoping that you can think broadly about the kind of impact that you want to make with your career and the different places in which that could happen. There's lots of different options. So this is our order of panelists. I already told you today. After present and after Dr. Lee gives her presentation, we'll have time, as I said, for questions and answers. So I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Dr. Lee.
Hi, everyone. Very glad to be here with all of you and have a conversation about how to successfully navigate, academic job market. And so first of all, I would also like to recognize my collaborator from GADE, because we have done this type of workshop, at SSWR anyway. So yeah, next slide. Okay. So the evolution of intellectual freedom. So that is just something for fun. At the beginning, you want to research, you're so passionate about whatever kind of research. And at the end, research in peace. It's just a joke, to start. Okay, yeah. Okay, so maybe the first thing we want to know is the type of positions that's available in the academic job market. Now, of course, the research intensive university, we all know about that. They focus on really researcher, and then somebody who are really good at research. And then we also have teaching university that focus on practice and also teaching. And also university in the middle, somewhere in the middle. We also have postdoc, we'll talk about that later. But the one thing that I want to emphasize is the practice experience is actually very important, because CSW actually require 2 years post-MSW experience to teach direct practice course. So regardless whether you're applying for the research intensive or the teaching university, that is actually something important. Now, the important thing for us to first know is actually how to locate the position. Next slide, please. Okay, so the important thing is actually how to locate the position. So right now, roughly, we have around 600 social work departments in the US. Now, I have listed 3 websites, so you will be able to identify and locate all the jobs, on either one of those websites. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the job market then. I have to say, usually social work has a really, really good job market, but this year it will be affected by COVID, so we'll talk about that later. So we have a lot more academic job positions than many other disciplines. The reason why is because we do have baby boomers, retiring, but the more important reason is because of the expanding enrollment of both the undergrad and also the MSW program across university in the US for almost like the past 20 years. I have to say at my institution, we've been just hiring for many, quite a number of years. So at 2019 APM, like CSW APM last year, they actually have 129 tenure-track position announcement, and many of them actually hiring multiple positions. The most that I have seen is actually 6 positions in one announcement. Now, last night, because of today, I also do some search. So at the CSW website, they have 43 faculty positions, but only 14 of them are actually tenure-track position announcement. Now, when we're talking about job market, we also want to know the competition. So we have 77 PhD program and 17 DSW program in the US. In the 2018, statistics, which was published by CSWE just in November last year, we have 303 PhD graduates and 119 DSW graduate, that year. But usually we will have around 300 to 350, PhD graduate each year on the job market. Yeah. Next slide. Oh. Okay, now, so the situation this year, I have to say, I'm very sorry to say, COVID affects so many aspects of our life, including job search. So there are many hiring freeze at many universities. National Association of Dean and Director of Social Work, they actually, all the deans have a survey, internal survey, in May. So only 13% are hiring this year, 37 unsure, and 50% say no. Now, on the other hand, I do want to share with you the enrollment trend because that is important. So at least at my institution, which is Ohio State University, we actually have increased enrollment at both the undergrad and also the MSW level. So what that means is it's not that there's no need for faculty. We have actually great needs still. It's just because of the hiring freeze. And so there will be uncertainty for this year, but that is the situation right now. So one thing for you to think about is actually the time for you to graduate also. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, so let me talk about the timeline. These are the pragmatics. So usually by August, September, that is the time when, we have all the job announcement. And so in September, for those of you who are in the job market, you'll be very busy. It's a full-time job at that time for you to prepare all this job application material. And so by October and also November, you'll be quite busy, with the screening interviews. And these interviews, it can happen on Zoom. And also usually before, a lot of them happen at CSWE APM and also at SSWR. The campus visit mostly happen at the end of November and the beginning of December. This is the time when, you will receive the campus visit invite, and the job offer will be a little later. Next slide. Okay, but as I have mentioned in the slide, things change, always changing. So even last year, we see some trends that is a little different. The announcement come out later, deadline for application actually later. There's a lot more video, screening interview, etc. Yeah. So next slide. Okay, so let's go to some really logistic about, job search. Now, the first thing, of course, the important thing is to think about what school you want to apply. That is actually very important. It's a puzzle, but what we are talking about, the most important thing is whether it's a good match. We're talking about your area, whether there's a match. There might be other consideration because of personal, like, geographic location. But the more important thing is also the types of universities. Next slide. Okay, so we have already mentioned there's research intensive, the research and teaching, the postdoc. Now, so the important thing is that you have to first think about what is your interest, what is your training, what will fit you the best. That will be the most important question. Now, next slide, please. Okay, so one thing I want to share with you. Over the year, my students, usually they apply for at least like 30 schools, and some of them even go to 50 or even 60. And so you're thinking about applying to a lot of schools. Now, some of them, even though if you're thinking about only like research intensive, it's helpful to have some mix, like, different category. But the important thing is like, you'll get so confused after a while. So one of the things that I always recommend the students like to do is to develop a spreadsheet. The one that I'm showing here. Now, this is just an example that you can actually keep all the information in one place and also keep all the status, like so that you don't forget. And also, like, very helpful for you to remind your faculty to write you the recommendation letters. Next one. Okay, now the application package. So after you decide on the school that you want to apply, the important thing is for you to put together your application package. I cannot emphasize enough, your CV is the heart of your application as well as your cover letter. Now, being on the search committee as chair, member, or just faculty for many years, what I can share with you is like, usually if we are hiring for a position, usually we'll receive like 100 or even more than 100 applications. And among them, around 20%, will be selected for the screening interview. We do not know you, as a job applicant. We only know you through your CV and also your cover letter. That is the thing that will get you to the first step, into the door, which is the screening interview. So that is so important, like, to really put time and effort for these two documents because they are very important. Now, for the cover letter, make sure that it's a tailored cover letter specific to the job announcement. And then make sure that, like, get feedback, only 2-3 pages, do not have really, really long, exactly sending what they request. Next slide. Okay, so these are some of the information, like, that we usually, like, ask for. Why is you a good fit? What's articulate your research trajectory and program at the very beginning, and then talk about your research, teaching, practice, service, etc., etc., and any additional information that they ask for. Yeah. Next one. Okay. So this one I want to really highlight, do not have a generic cover letter because that is not helpful. The reason why I can share with you as a chair, I have seen situations that, like, people have a really good, well-rounded scholarship, like, but on the other hand, we ask them for a diversity statement or, like, the experience with working with diverse students. We do not see that in the cover letter. And then we are thinking, that person might not be very sincere, like, really applying to our program. So I want to just emphasize again, you have to really pay attention to your cover letter. It has to be perfect because that is the thing that gets you to the door to the screening interview, which is around the 20%, like, of our applicants. Next one. Okay, so things to avoid. Proofread. The worst thing that I've seen is like it's the wrong university, or the chair name is incorrect, also incomplete. The other thing is also like, it's very helpful to communicate with the chair, but do not be very high maintenance, okay? Yeah, next one. Okay, now, so what will be helpful? I just want to share two things. The first thing, get a sample, like, find some successful, like, letters, whoever, like, successfully apply for a really good job, find their letter as a sample and learn from it. And the other thing is like get feedback from faculty member, from mentors, because it really, really helps you, to get that feedback. Yeah. Okay, next one. Okay, so you're into the 20%. They already select you for the screening interview. Congratulations. So this is only around, like usually it's around 25 to 30 minutes. So for this one, whatever you have done so far, like, as a doctoral student, the paper that you submitted, you published, the conference you went to, the award that you received, it's all on your CV and also, like, in your cover letter, and get you to this stage. So once you're at this stage, it's no longer about your CV. It's actually about who you are. So for the screening interview, the important thing is like you only have 25 minutes to impress your committee for them to select you and invite you to the campus visit. So how are you able to make yourself like stand out? The first thing I think is very important is like clearly articulate your research and also like, answer the question. Know who you are, show your strengths, and also know who they are and do your homework. This is actually very important. Now, the other thing is also because it's a screening interview. So they are interviewing you. So be very careful. I have a lot of students, like, because all this kind of stuff are nerve-breaking. So they have practiced a lot. They memorize a lot of stuff. And then they spit out like the answer. But that didn't work actually, because you really have to listen to the question and then provide, a succinct and really, informative response. So practice, that is very helpful. So the most important helpful way, that I recommend to all my students is actually to do mock interview, because having that experience really helped you, to get ready, for this part. Next one. Okay, so these are the interview questions. Probably many of you already know that they'll ask you research, teaching, all that kind of thing. And so be prepared. Also, at the end, they always ask you, do you have any question for us? So make sure that you also have some questions that actually demonstrate your sincerity, your interest in the position. Okay, next one. But for now, because of COVID, and even before, the year before, we already have like a lot of Zoom and Skype interview. So I know some of the panelists will actually share with you this one, so I won't go into all the details, but make sure that online is actually a little different than face-to-face. So I do have some tips for you, which is the next one. Okay, so get ready at least 15 minutes, before the interview, because anything can happen. And make sure the technology works for you. I've been in this video and also Zoom interviews that there are technology problems from their end, which is not a good sign, okay? And so consider using a more formal setting, because you have to look really professional, and also prepare for your surrounding, because when you're on Zoom, you actually look different. Even the lighting actually make a difference. So dress appropriately, but then also make sure that you actually have practice and actually, try it before. The other thing is because it's not in person, so smile, make sure that you're delightful, and then it's a good conversation. Next one, please. Okay, now, so congratulations. After the screening interview, the next step is actually campus visit. Now, if we hire one position, usually we'll invite three candidates to come to the visit. And so if it is like 2, 3, it might be 5. So what I want to share with you at this point is when you actually get a campus visit, you actually have 30 to 50% chance to get the job. So you're already there, okay? So usually it's 1 or 2 days. So make sure that you know exactly the schedule and also prepare, for the event. So next slide. Okay, so campus interview, that is even more nerve-wracking. But I just want to share with you that at this time, it's no longer about your CV. It's because they already know that. They already know you through the screening interview. It's just all the faculty and also the the college constituency will be meeting with you. So at this the time when you think about your professional skill, your knowledge, that how well you articulate your knowledge through the job talk, and also your relational skill. Because one thing at the campus visit, people are not just looking at whether how strong you are. They're also looking whether they want you to be their colleagues. So these are things that we actually have to remember, because campus visit is actually a very tiring experience. It's very intense, but your adrenaline will get you going. But on the other hand, you're on the whole day. So make sure that, regardless of how nervous you are, we can tell you to relax, but still make sure that you rest well, plan for a long day, dress for success, and be yourself. Yeah. Okay, now, so right now, everything moved to camp virtual. Even in April and May, I have students went through 4 or 5 virtual campus visit. So again, the important thing, being on Zoom the entire day is actually very difficult. So make sure that you schedule breaks. Technology has to work. Make sure that you actually know the university and know the people. Do your homework. It's so important, because you have to impress them that they want to hire you. So the more interest you have, so a lot of my students, they actually have folders, and then they keep all the information to make sure they have the list of questions, they remember all the information, but expect it will be exhausting. So make sure you have energy bars, you have snacks, to keep you going for the whole day. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, so the psychology of job hunting. Focus on your strengths and let your passion be infectious. Now, this one I do want to share that, because I think the most beautiful thing that we see in a candidate is the passion for their research and for the work that they are doing and the impact that they want to make. So let your passion, really inspire, the people. Now, of course, your research is rigorous, everything, but make sure that yeah. And then take very good care of yourself. This one is very important. And one thing I always mention is as much as they are interviewing you, you are actually also interviewing them to see whether that actually is a good place, for you to land. Next one. Okay, now when you receive the offer, congratulations, so happy. However, the tips that I think a lot of people will share with you is never accept right away. Just be very professional and excited, okay? But then, let them know you'll get back with them on their timeline. So at this point, talk to your program director, talk to your mentor, talk to your dean. And then these are a list of things. Now, I know the PowerPoint, will be posted on the website. So you will have the PowerPoint. So we don't need to go through this list. But make sure that these are the things that you cannot negotiate. However, negotiate in a reasonable way, because I actually have a dean talk with me sometime, because we know each other, that she's a little unhappy about how one student negotiate the offer. So make sure that it's also reasonable. So talk to people, get advice. Next one. Okay, now, so basically, these are some of the thoughts that we have for a faculty position. But then the next thing is is a postdoc, position actually right for me? Because especially because of COVID, it might be actually a good idea for all of you to think not just faculty position, but some other alternatives. And postdoc is a step for you to get a really good, position. So let me share with you very briefly. There are usually 3 types of postdoc: developmental and training. Now, this one are usually at the federal level. MIH, T33, these are the things that more at the federal level. Now, but there are also another big group of postdoc. They're project-based. So a faculty get a project, a funded project, and they're looking for somebody. And some are actually hybrid. Now, so that's the reason why, for faculty position, I can give you 3 websites. You can locate all the positions. But for postdoc, there's no centralized position for postdoc, position. Now, it's quite easy. Next slide, please. Yeah, next one. Okay, it's actually quite easy to get the federal level one, like the developmental and also the training one. But for the other one, it actually depends on relational. Like, you have to talk to your mentor, people actually, who are in the field, like expert in that area. Like, you can write to them and see whether they have any, possibility. But the important thing is actually, your network. That will tell you, like, where there might be some postdoc position. I also listed like a website here, like for some resource, like which is SSWR. Now, but on the other hand, one thing I also want to, student also ask me, so what's the difference between the postdoc and also like a faculty position, Now, for a postdoc, usually they're interdisciplinary and involve teamwork. So if your work is more interdisciplinary, this is actually a good way to go. Postdoc, definitely focus on research. And also because of the network you build, because of the postdoc position, it will help you tremendously in your future research program. So if you're thinking about more national, like federal funded, like, research trajectory, this is actually a very good idea also. Now, of course, like, it's really up to, your decision whether a postdoc or a faculty position will be more relevant, to you. Next one. Okay, so to wrap up, like the first thing, brief. I know this year I talked to a lot of students, even program directors. We are not nervous because of the job market, but on the other hand, that doesn't mean like, there's no job, like, just breathe. Remember self-care. Also understand job search is actually a marathon. It's not a sprint, And so will be there for quite a while. So you really, really have to take care of yourself. Remember your strengths, focus on what you have, and enjoy the process because not many people get to do this. Thank you. Now, so I also have some resources here, like, for you guys, and I hope, like, this conversation will give you a big picture, about the job market.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Dr. Lee. Really appreciate that introduction. So we're going to go ahead and move into our first panel presentation now with Dr. Bellamy. So I will turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Liz, and thank you, Moye. I think that was a really lovely overview, and I will expand on some of the ideas that Dr. Lee shared in the beginning portion of our presentation. But yes, my name is Jennifer Bellamy. I'm Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development and Professor at the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work. And I've been at DU since 2014, but I'm going to share with you my winding pathway to get to this point, and also some reflections, mainly on some missteps. So this will be it'll be a little bit of a fail fest that I'm going to share with you today. So next slide, please. So I want to start actually in telling you about some misperceptions, misunderstandings. I'm calling them my doctoral training myths. And I couldn't even pinpoint for you precisely where some of these messages came from exactly. But I went into my doctoral training, I'm going to say, with a lot of ignorance, to be honest, from the get-go. No one in my family had ever gone to graduate school before, let alone entering a PhD program. And I knew I wanted to do research. It was sort of like that little cartoon that Dr. Lee sent or put in her PowerPoint presentation in that first slide. It was just like, I had a topic that I was passionate about. I knew I needed to get training in how to do research. And that is almost all that I knew. And I did want to have an academic position. That was sort of my goal. And along the way, I picked up some messages, and I think they set me up to be less invested in thinking about my trajectory as an academic. then would have been ideal. So one of them was a sort of sense of, don't worry, you'll get a job. And I'll pair that up with these other myths were floating around when I was a doctoral student. Things like, there are more jobs than there are PhDs coming out in social work. And Dr. Lee already shared some statistics that sort of run counter to that, but was sort of this overconfidence in feeling like not only would there be a position for me, but it would be the one that I wanted. And in my mind, I was much more focused on geography than I was really thinking about the different types of schools that we were just talking about. I really wanted to be closer to family, which for me was Colorado or Texas. So I was really focused on those schools, even though the variety of schools in those states is quite broad, but I wasn't really thinking about myself as crafting my trajectory to be attractive to different types of school. I also heard things like, one publication is enough. Like if you sort of just like publish that one thing that could get you in the door. And what I wish I would have understood back then is that different schools are really looking for different things. And it's true that some schools want to see a lot more productivity in terms of publications, but other schools might more highly value your pursuit of external funding, where others might really want to see community engagement. That's a really strong value at the University of Denver, where I'm at right now. So really doing your homework, as Dr. Lee said, is super important in understanding the schools, not just what they put on their websites, but ideally using your network to have conversations with folks at those universities and those schools to sort of understand what they're looking at, not just at a simple, is this a teaching school or is this an R1 research intensive institution, but there are a lot of other elements to that, and having a conversation can really help you. And then the other thing that I misunderstood is that, oh, if you're at a highly ranked school, so I did my PhD at Columbia University, people said, oh, you can go anywhere. Well, you know, in theory, that is possible, but certainly can't rely on the rank or the quality of your institution to be your ticket in. It really needs to be more than that. Next slide, please. So I went in without a lot of preparation and a lot of bad assumptions. And so my first search out of my PhD program, and I'm not actually sure how many people I've shared this with, I only submitted 5 applications. I got 3 first-round interviews, and I got 0 campus visits. Gulp. So I went in with this expectation, I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to get one in the geographic area that I'm looking for. And my approach was not best practices. And we could unpack why that was exactly. I think, you know, maybe I didn't have an advisor or mentors in place who, like Dr. Lee, would have been great to give me this insight and information and training. I think I felt like, oh, I should know this myself. I should be able to write a cover letter. I don't need all that feedback and review. I didn't practice even those first-round interviews. So basically, I did everything that Dr. Lee just told us not to do, and the result was poor. And this job market, just to give you a sense of this timing, I was coming out of my PhD in 2006, which was at that moment in time a pretty healthy job market, and you know, not in the situation that we're in now, and yet still I ended up without an academic offer at the end of the search. Now back then, you all may not know, the academic job market for social work happened a lot later. A lot of people were doing initial interviews really at SSWR, and so you might have an application process that starts that started back then several months later than it does today, and things have just gotten earlier and earlier in general, but still different schools do have different timelines. So next slide, please. I went sideways in a lot of places in having these myths and assumptions in my head. I didn't have a backup plan. And I didn't have this review of materials and networking and advice seeking. And I used pretty much the same letter and materials to each school. So all of the mistakes that we just talked about. Next slide, please. And what I ended up doing was a postdoc, and I'm really grateful that I did. At the time, if you would have said, oh, congratulations, you know, you decided to get a postdoc, and a wonderful one at that, Washington University in the School of Social Work. I was, because it wasn't my initial plan, I was at first frustrated with myself for not thinking about what is my backup plan. And then it was a scramble because I was searching for postdocs, and Dr. Lee was saying it's really tough because they're not all parked in the same place. They're a little bit more difficult to find. I didn't really understand the mechanics of a postdoc. But at the end of the day, I will say this is probably the best career move, I could say, of my entire experience as an academic. So it was a scramble, but during that time, I had the opportunity to take a moment and step back, get my dissertation papers published, and bulked up my publications. So this was one thing I wanted to say to you. If you are thinking about doing a postdoc, I think it's really important that that postdoc give you the opportunity to develop some of your own work. So Dr. Lee was talking about some that are federally funded, some that are project-based and things like that. Whatever that looks like, I think it's a really important thing for you to have a conversation with potential postdoc mentors about the ability to work on scholarship that will help you advance your CV. What can happen sometimes when folks apply, they've done a postdoc, but their CV hasn't really developed any further. So it sort of is the question like, well, what did you do during your postdoc? So you don't want it to be completely in service of somebody else's agenda. It needs to support you as well. And I will say that as I got more experience with the postdoc and now much later in my career, it really has been something that set me apart. And because postdocs are still relatively unusual in social work, it can be that leg up for you. It can open some doors that might not otherwise have been available to you, either because of your expanded networks or because of that additional training. So for me, I'm an intervention developer now. And most of my training as a PhD student was actually secondary data analysis, and intervention work is really complicated and sort of a different thing altogether. But in my postdoc, I was able to get that training. I also had the benefit of seeing 2 different institutions. I know some people do a postdoc in their same institution where they're at as a PhD, and that's great too. But if you do move, you know, some people are like, oh, I don't want to move and move again. If you're open to that, I think that it can be a benefit of seeing different institutions. And also I had the opportunity to independently teach, which I didn't really so much as a PhD. Next slide, please. So I would say if you're thinking about a postdoc in particular, look broadly and network. Consider other disciplines. So as Dr. Lee said, a lot are multidisciplinary, but they might be not in a school of social work, but other schools that are allied professions. And the other thing that I want to say to you is it's possible to build your own postdoc. So you can definitely network and ask if there are funds available and work with colleagues to identify possibilities. But you can actually initiate postdocs on your own, especially if you find a mentor who is willing to help you apply for funding sources that might be available to pull together a postdoc. So you can be proactive. And like I said, you do want to ask about, you know, how much protected time you have for your own work, and also think about length. So postdocs vary a little bit. So many are 1 to 3 years. Some are even 5 years long. I feel like 1 year wouldn't have been enough. Like I literally would have been in the postdoc and then starting the job cycle right away. 2 years is what I did, which felt about right. But I think 1 other year on top would have been okay as well. Next slide, please. So my second search, I was coming out in 2008, which was another economic downturn, which was challenging and definitely had an impact. But my strategy was very different. I applied everywhere. So I was in that 30 to 50 application range. I did a national search. I talked to everyone I could. I asked for tons of feedback on my letter, my materials, my initial interview, my job talk. I tailored those materials to every institution, and the result was I got an offer for an assistant professor position at the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration, and I spent 6 years there before coming to University of Denver, yay, where I finally got back to the area of the country that I was aiming for initially. So it took some doing. It was a winding pathway, and I learned a lot, but at the end, I'm really thrilled with where I've ended up. I think I'm out of time, and so I'll pass it back to Liz to introduce our next panelist.
Wonderful, thanks so much. It's really helpful information. So I am delighted to introduce you to our second panelist, Dr. Geller, and I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself and share some more tips with you.
Great, thanks, Liz. I'm Amanda Geller. I hope you guys can all hear me. Liz, give me a thumbs up, or Jen, if you can. Great. So I am just beginning a tenure-track assistant professor position at UC Irvine in the Department of Criminology, Law, and Society. So I have a PhD in social policy analysis from a School of Social Work, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on my research. Next slide, and then we can talk a little bit about my trajectory and kind of the wide variety of places I've been. So if you look at any of the 20 or so cover letters from my latest time on the job market, my research statement says I examine interactions between contemporary urban residents and systems of social and legal control. Now, what that means in practical terms and in kind of my day-to-day research work is that I study race and policing. I study criminal justice and social inequality. I have work that looks at the role of incarceration in families, and particularly in my most recent job search, that meant that winding up in a place where I had a pathway to tenure was really important to me. This is a topic that has become increasingly politicized. I want to have the intellectual freedom to do the work to its most policy relevant, its most practically relevant. So that became a big priority for me on the job market. I should also mention I do quantitative work, working with large survey data sets, administrative data sets from police departments and other organizations. So next slide. So I know this is a SSWR event, and I have somewhat of a kind of not typical background for a social work PhD. I don't have an MSW. My undergrad and first master's degree are in industrial engineering. I worked at the Rand Corporation doing public policy work with a technical focus and some criminal justice work when I first came out of my master's, and then realized if I wanted to study criminal justice, I should probably learn some social science. So I did my PhD at the Columbia School of Social Work with a focus on social policy analysis. And then I will talk about each of my job transitions and searches, but I stuck around for what wound up being a 6-year staff research, essentially postdoc position before I found my first faculty job. I was at the School of Public Health at Columbia for about a year, and then moved to a clinical role at NYU, which I've just left for my current tenure-track role at UCI. So next slide. So given that background, when I talk to students, when I talk to people starting out on the job market, I always advise people don't try and replicate my trajectory. I've been extremely fortunate with the assistance of some really fabulous mentors. But what I try and advise people is that throughout my trajectory, there are a couple of themes that I think could be broadly applicable. And one was that in each of my searches or non-searches, as I'll talk about, knowing what my priorities were. So my initial post-PhD job search, the best thing I could have possibly done in 2007 as I was finishing up was to not go on the market at all. So I stayed in my PhD department in this staff research position because one of my wonderful mentors had an opportunity to apply for a grant that was right in my area of interest, and carved out what became the first couple of years of my postdoc. So I also had geographic preferences at the time. I knew I wanted to stay in New York City. I did have kind of personal flexibility. I didn't have family responsibilities, which meant I could stay in a lower paying, postdoc rather than faculty position. But what this meant was that I didn't go on the market right after my PhD, and instead I spent time getting papers out, developing my research agenda. And after those initial 2 years, it's the middle of the Great Recession, and we were able to continue to apply for funding. And it meant that I was able to stay in the city I wanted to be in, have a kind of financially stable enough position. And I had the opportunity to do some work that I found incredibly meaningful, was kind of impactful from a policy perspective. And I stayed at Columbia. I got to know more people within the university. And when a faculty opportunity at the public health school came up, I was well positioned to apply. I was able to give my job talk there. I had plenty of people who knew the institution that were able to help me put my best foot forward for the position I ultimately took. That job wound up not being a great fit for me, so I was on the market again a year and change later. My advice from that search was, I say, when opportunity knocks, answer. I started to tell people I was looking around, people I trusted, to not mention I was searching until I had some news and a negotiating position, but let me know about opportunities. So the position I found at NYU, I actually found off-cycle. So the 2013 market had largely cleared, but this position was still open. It was a clinical faculty role running an interdisciplinary quantitative methods program in the sociology department at NYU. So I am not a sociologist by training, but this is a position that was well suited for somebody with an interdisciplinary background. I see a question about what clinical faculty implies. What that meant was it was not a tenure-track position and had a higher teaching load than the tenure-track faculty. So I ran a master's program. It has a high administrative load. I taught more classes than the rest of my colleagues. And that actually brings me to the next point in describing the search. So I really liked everybody I met in the department, but I knew that transitioning from a tenure track role to a clinical role, there were things I would be giving up. So there were, again, kind of knowing what was important, there were things that I found incredibly important to negotiate on. So at NYU, it is not a given that clinical faculty get to be PIs on research grant applications. It's not a guarantee that clinical faculty have a generous research budget. Clinical faculty, until I came in, had not typically gone to faculty meetings. So I wanted to make sure that I was in a position where I'd be able to be an intellectual part of a department where I was the only clinical faculty member. So the department was largely incredibly accommodating about this, but I kind of knew that if I was going to be moving from a tenure track to a non-tenure track role, that it was very important to me to keep the opportunity to continue developing my research agenda. And it wound up for 6 years being a terrific place for me to do my work. I've had great colleagues, lots of opportunities for research collaboration. But as I mentioned at the beginning, given the work that I do, the opportunity to have a pathway to tenure eventually became very important. So there was no real push factor that meant I needed to go on the market last year. Given the current circumstances, I'm extremely glad I did. I'm glad that I was able to find this new position and kind of get that squared away before the bottom fell out on the economy. But I kind of knew last year that it was time to do a kind of hard push on the market. So I knew I needed a pathway to tenure. I interviewed predominantly for associate level jobs. The job I ultimately took was an advanced assistant job, but one of the things that I was very concerned about in my application and interview process was that I would have a very short timeline to tenure. And I've been assured that I can go up next year and that the department is already very supportive of my materials and my application. Given my background, the fact that I don't have an MSW, that my research area is on this criminal justice and social inequality kind of vein, I applied on, I think, 4 different markets. So I applied to schools of social work, departments of criminology, sociology, and public policy. And I have wound up in criminology, law, and society in a department that I think is a great fit. But I would encourage people to kind of look widely. So got one last slide. I know I'm kind of running short on time, so I'll just mention one quick thing, because I know in the coming year a lot of people are going to be on virtual searches. My interviews as a candidate were all in person. The search for my replacement at NYU was a virtual search. The 2 things I would just give you as a clear takeaway are virtual visits are kind of awkward. Not as awkward as you might think. I think in the last 6 months, everybody's gotten very familiar with Zoom. The one thing that I would advise as a candidate is that you have fewer informal interactions in an online interview than you would if you were doing a campus visit and have coffee breaks and dinners and lunches. So make the most of that time. That means you'll have opportunities in Q&A. People will be asking you questions in Q&A. Just remember that that is a chance to give people the opportunity to see who you would be as a colleague, how you interact in those unscripted interactions. So I will stop there. Thank you all for your time, and I'll turn it back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Geller. Really appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to now turn over to our 3rd panelist. So Dr. Jin, a warm welcome to you, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Good afternoon. I'm Seok Won Jin, Assistant Professor at the University of Memphis School of Social Work. I'm also currently serving as a DSW Program Director. I joined the University of Memphis in August 2018. So before joining my current position, I worked as a tenure-track assistant professor at Clark Atlanta University School of Social Work for 5 years. I received my doctoral and MSW degrees from the University of Minnesota in 2013. I also received my master's degrees in gerontology and social welfare from Ball State University in Indiana and from Kyung University, South Korea, respectively. My undergraduate major was German linguistics and literature at Yonsei University, South Korea. My research has focused on reducing disparities in health behaviors, including preventive behaviors such as cancer screening and HPV vaccination, and risky behaviors such as internet addiction. Next slide, please. Actually, I had 3 times of opportunities for stepping into the job market in 2012, 2016, and 2017. So today I'd like to share hands-on information building on my experiences with you all. Next slide, please. So when I was in the job market from 2012 fall through 2013 spring, I was looking for a position at either research or teaching university. Also, I have to say, I was an international student at the time. I think some of you today's conference are also international students looking for a job. So I believe job search experiences were quite different from local students. Particularly in job searching, I paid attention to the job description regarding visa and permanent residency support. I had 2 campus visits. I got job offers from both universities, and I accepted an offer from Clark Atlanta University. I accepted the offer from Clark because Clark Atlanta University School of Social Work was trying to move forward from a teaching school to a research school by providing a wide range of research support at the time. Also, the teaching load at the school was 2-2 for the first year, and then 3-3 from the second year. Finally, Atlanta had a considerable size of my ethnic population, which offered good opportunities for my research and very nice Asian restaurants and grocery stores, which are very important to me and my family. Next slide, please. During the 3 years at Clark Atlanta University, my research was very fruitful. I was able to conduct 2 pilot research projects externally funded by SAMHSA and NIMHD. But in 2016 fall, I had to be back in the job market again because around that year, many leadership changes occurred at Clark Atlanta University. Clark had a new president, and the school also had a new dean. In addition, a field liaison service was added to my 3-3 teaching loads, and supports for research were reduced significantly. Also, permanent residency support was in progress, but it went very slowly. Also, I decided to be back in the job market at the time because I wanted to assess myself. I was curious whether I was on the right track and my research achievements were competitive enough at the national level. I had 3 campus visits, but I got 0 job offer at the time. Next slide. In 2017 fall, I was back in the job market again with a more focused job search criteria than before. I was looking for a position at a research university that can support my research and my tenure. I had 8 invitations for campus visit. I completed 6 job talks while I could not complete the other 2 because I had already accepted a job offer then. Out of 6 campus visits, I received 4 job offers, and then I accepted an offer from my current university. At the University of Memphis, my teaching load was 2-2 for the first year, but my current teaching load is 1-1 with no field liaison service requirement because of my current DSW director service. Next, please. From these experiences, I have learned about some tips which help prepare for job search and interviews. The first tip is to look into the strategic plan of the university for which you are applying. The majority of universities create their own strategic plans and share them with their employees and the public. I have found that looking into these strategic plans are very helpful when I prepare for application materials and interviews. Strategic plan help us better understand where the university is, as well as they are as where the university is heading. So strategic plans also provide some good insights on what types of applicants they are looking for. On the flip side, if you could discuss the strategic plan during the interviews with the search committee and the administrators, the interviewers might have a good impression of you in how well prepared you are for your interviews and how much you are interested in that position. Next slide, please. Second, please seek consultations from as many inside and outside persons as possible. These persons can be your mentors, advisors, and professors at your current or previous institute. But if possible, please have conversations with the persons who are working currently or worked before at the department you are applying for to ask about its working environment and atmosphere. I think this is very critical because oftentimes people with whom you will work are more important than any other aspects. Imagine, although you got a job offer with a great support package from a top research university, if you do not get along with the people around you in the department, it would not take a long time for you to consider going back to the job market again. Next slide. The last tip is to keep in mind that research universities also highly value teaching. And in the same way, teaching universities also underscore research. It is true, all universities and colleges are actually looking for a good researcher and educator. So last slide. Lastly, I'd like to share several other things you may need to consider in the process of job search and interviews. If you are currently working at a position of a university, you should be careful about its confidentiality and work ethics. If necessary, please request confidentiality of your interview and campus visit in your cover letter or email. When you schedule for interviews or job talks on campus, please be careful about all your teaching and service schedules you already have at the department. For this, do not hesitate to discuss your concerns with your interviewers. Interviewers may love an applicant with a high standard with work ethics. Also, job searching and transitioning may take a long time, and sometimes they result in no success. So while doing your search efforts, please do not stop your current work, such as implementing ongoing research projects, turning in grant proposals, and writing papers for publications. I know this is not easy to do, but you should continue doing it. Finally, please remember that everything can change from what was planned originally. Your interview schedule may be postponed due to inclement weather. Just before your job talk presentation, electronic power go out. That actually happened during one of my previous job talks. The number of students in your teaching demo can be much smaller or greater than you assumed. A job offer you received may be canceled due to the coronavirus 19 pandemic and other thousand reasons. Everything can change at any time. However, please do not be frustrated by those changes. Instead, keep in mind that these changes can be a great opportunity for you to show how flexible you are in teaching and how well you can respond to unexpected events occurring inside or outside the classroom, as well as our life, real life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jin. Really appreciate that. Okay, so I'm very glad to welcome our final panelists today, Dr. Abigail Williams-Butler. And after Dr. Williams-Butler has a chance to share her insights with you, we'll be moving into Q&A, starting with the questions that were sent in advance. And then we will try to manage, or we'll try to bring in some of the questions that you all have been sending in the chat as well. So go ahead and take it away, Dr. Williams-Butler. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So glad to be joining you all today. So I am going to talk today about my transition to the tenure track. I actually requested that I could go last because my transition has not been as winding, but I definitely wanted to speak about what, particularly my situation, having a postdoc transitioning to a tenure track position. And a lot of my experiences really do kind of replicate some of the things that Dr. Lee and Dr. Bellamy have said, just in terms of the major benefit of a postdoc and how I think it's set me up really well for the future. So if I can get the next slide. So broadly, my research is understanding the developmental trajectory of children and adolescents in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. I'm particularly interested in looking at intersectionality, so the role that race, gender, and class play in the disproportionality within the child welfare and juvenile justice systems specifically, but also looking at resilience and protective factors and looking at how these different mechanisms can operate differently, particularly for Black youth in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, and looking at, really the things that happen or occur in an individual's life that can really help them to overcome some negative aspects, with the primary goal of reducing racial disparities within these systems. A new area that's also emerged within that is child welfare policy. So looking at the role that child welfare policy plays, particularly in some of these disparities, particularly. So regarding methods, my methods have been expanded greatly, again, as a result of my postdoc. I started off in grad school being trained primarily on administrative data, survey data. And what happened with my postdoc in particular is that I was able to expand into more intervention research, collecting data, which is very, very messy, I've learned. You get to ask your own questions, but it's very messy in the process. The goal of, I say policy focus as my research, I ultimately hope that it has an impact on policy change and disrupting systems in that sense. So next slide. Yeah, so I have a background that has really been psychology and social work kind of mixed in it together. I did undergrad with psychology, got my MSW, and then I went on to the University of Michigan Joint Program. So I have a degree in social work and developmental psychology. And my experiences have really built upon each other. And how I ended up getting into a postdoc is very similar to what was said before. It was really navigating relationships. So I actually was on a listserv, I don't remember which one, and I saw an opportunity come about and it said, hey, are you interested in social work and child welfare and from a developmental perspective, looking at these different issues, but being able to collect data. And at that time, I primarily had done secondary data analysis, administrative data. And I thought, wow, this is great, because one of the major limitations of secondary data is you don't really get to ask your own questions. And so I was like, wow, this is amazing. I can really see the fit of using the knowledge that I already have in these areas, but then using it to collect data. So for me, it was all about kind of gaining a new skill set in terms of what I really wanted to do. And so when I reached out to my postdoc supervisor, who's a great, wonderful person, and, was kind of talking about this experience, he was like, well, that's great. That's great. We're also hiring for assistant professors as well. And I was like, well, that would be great too. So while kind of working towards the kind of relationship base from the postdoc, I was able to apply and go through the process of the assistant professor process as well. And so, you know, I had a campus visit. I did a lot of the different things that would, you know, was mentioned before, but it was kind of really helpful kind of having that insight kind of knowledge in terms of, you know, what they were looking for and things such as that. And that's where I currently am, still at my assistant professor first position. Next slide. So I think in terms of thinking about tips for preparation, because my path was a little different, what's most important to you is, I think, important, because one of the things that I was focused on when I first started the process was, you know, I want to gain these new skills. I want to do these different types of things. But I mean, it's important to think about, you know, we're all whole people and we have a lot going on. I think a couple of people mentioned ahead of time that they had a geographical location in mind. And that wasn't so much my thought. It was mainly more just like, I want to get these skills. I'm really, really interested. And I didn't think too much about the geographical location. But I mean, so that was one thing. But I think also what's interesting is flexibility, because, you know, I work with a lot of doctoral students now, and a lot of them, you know, they say, well, you know, oh, I don't want to get a tenure track position because it's hard, or you just can't find one, and things like that. But I think it's really important to note that you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do and the questions that you can ask. Whereas, you know, for a postdoc, because I did still have a postdoc, you know, a lot of that time is spent in doing what, you know, the project needs and moving forward in that type of way. Whereas when you have a tenure track position, you're granted much more flexibility in terms of your time and energy and your interests. And also the ability to set the agenda of your work. So that's a major plus. But, you know, again, the geographical there are a lot of geographical limitations to that. So I think that that's really important to take into consideration, particularly related to, and again, maybe this has changed related to COVID a little bit, because I think now people are able to work from home more, and particularly, you know, as a working academic with a small child, the flexibility is key. So that's just something that's really important to keep in mind. In terms of tips for preparation, also reaching out to your network. So colleagues of colleagues. I've had a lot of opportunities that have come about as a result of working with someone who's working with someone, you know? And, you know, it's great because obviously you have to be qualified and you have to be prepared, but it always helps if someone's able to put in a good word for you, particularly related to the different opportunities that arise. And something that I found is that I was able to expand my network into projects in areas that I don't think I would have had if I had not have been able to spend that time in a postdoc. I was also able to get all of my dissertation papers out. So I think before my assistant professor began, I was able to get just about all of them out, and I recently wrapped up my last one, which is wonderful. Also, just being able to, the ability to renew a postdoc as well. I think that's important, because oftentimes postdocs are 1 year with the option of renewal. And so, I mean, and things again might be different as it relates to COVID, because if there's funding for that additional year, but oftentimes it's tied to the funding of the PI or your research mentor. And so that's something to keep just to keep in mind as well. And also it's really important in terms of being flexible, because what a great fit might not look like what you expect it to look like. So it really is important just to keep in mind that something that might look scary or just would not work at all might actually end up being the best thing for you. So it really is keeping an open mind and being able to go where the opportunity is, because in the end it might work out that, you know, things work out. And finally, academia is not grad school. I think this was the biggest kind of shake for me, just in terms of, you know, you don't have that core group of, you know, folks anymore. You're out there and you're on your own kind of. And so just really being aware that throughout this process, a lot of it, you know, can be isolating and things such as that. But again, I think it's really important to have your social network together, both professionally and socially, just in terms of thinking about ultimately where you want to be and where you want to end up. So.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dr. Williams-Butler. I appreciate that. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and move into our question and answer section. And I'm going to start us off here with some of the questions that we've gotten before we started today, and some of them have been answered before. One question that came in was wondering about, yes, so go ahead, panelists, you can turn on your cameras and jump in as you feel ready to answer. One of the questions that came in was the number of applications that folks should be planning on putting in and kind of preparing themselves for that level of work, as well as the timing of tenure track versus postdoc applications within the year.
Maybe I can, just answer that, because I already talked a little bit about that. So for the number of applications, actually 30 to 50, I would say, try to apply as many places as possible, because you never know what happened. And so, yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it. So in terms of the timing, for tenure track position, usually the announcement will come out beginning August. And then, but it can, but most of them will be in the fall semester. But all year round, we still receive announcement, but most of them will be around, this time. Now, postdoc really have no, because as shared, because it could be, now for the federal funded ones, yes, they do have timeline, but for the project-based one, because it's really depending on the projects, and they can happen any time of the year. So if you're thinking about postdoc, start making the connection and also the search, as soon as possible.
Could I also add a recommendation that you give your advisor or anyone else who's writing you letters a bit of a heads up if you are a heavy applier, because they'll need to supply those letters for you, and if they can get that, that can be helpful as well.
Wonderful, thanks. So what happens if you get an offer but they say that it's not negotiable? And do you just accept the offer as is, or is it okay to try to negotiate a little bit? How do you manage that situation?
I don't know. This is really, I can just quickly, it's just, thinking about all the negotiation my students have done. Usually, it's very rare that nothing is actually negotiable. Now, they can say maybe the salary, yes, that can happen because it's really the budget. But there's so many other things, like the list. You can actually, negotiate on anything, like the moving expense, the GLA, so there are actually a lot of flexibility. So, so do not just tie to the salary, because that's only one thing, some salary could be also some other. But of course, my gut feeling is do you really want the job? Because, and also, do you have any other choices? So I don't think there's a simple, straightforward answer to that question. But one thing I would invite, whoever raised this question, to be more open in terms of what kind of things could be negotiated.
Also,
one thing, sorry.
Yeah, I also want to add Dr. Lee, what she said. Yes, it's not easy to trade or negotiate, but my recommendation is to ask. So even though it doesn't work, but we can ask. So what would be possible, what would be not? And we need to check the cut line, and then we can ask about the kind of a startup funding or the conference travel funds. But if they want to have you in their department, they try to support anything with anything. So please ask. But that's my recommendation.
Yeah, and I will just piggyback on that and say at the point that you've been made an offer and you're deciding whether or not to accept it, you have as much negotiating power as you are ever going to have. So they want you to come, and they, in most cases, they really want you to come and they want you to stay. So they want to make the job as attractive to you as possible, because if they cannot give you the working conditions you want, you're going to be back on the market. So at that point, they are investing in you as well. So I would just encourage whoever asked the question and everyone else to just ask for what they think is going to make this job a good long-term relationship for them, because that's in everybody's best interest.
I'm not sure if all of you know that institutions that are public typically have salaries that are posted publicly. And so it's a really important tool for equity. So I'd really encourage you to go and look. It might be the local newspaper, but if you Google their salaries, not just on Glassdoor or something like that, there's like an official organization that keeps track of them. It can be a little complicated if it's a base salary versus which is usually 9 months or 10 months, and then you can fill in some time during the summertime, or if it's a 12 months, people who have, it just, sometimes it's not exactly, but it'll give you a sense of if what you're being offered is fair. But absolutely, schools tend to want to, they've made a lot of investment to get you to this point and really want you to come and be happy. Mm-hmm. We have another question here about regular application hours. So what does that mean? Can you talk a little bit more about that and just sort of the management of the process of applying?
I think that was a question we got during Dr. Lee, your presentation.
Oh, can you repeat the question again?
The question is, what does it mean to have regular application hours?
Oh,
you mentioned that as a tip.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've been thinking regular like application hour. I see that actually is to refer to the slide. Okay, now, so what that means is because it's actually a full-time job. It's actually very exhausting. You know, if you actually think about managing 30 to 50 applications. So, I mean, it's not easy. So what that means is like you set aside some time, you set some boundary so that you won't like, you know, in the middle of 2 a.m. still trying to like, you know, I mean, do all this like, you know, I mean, applications. So like, you know, make sure that like you schedule some time and you protect that time, you know, I mean, to focus on like application. And also, so the other time you can like actually do some other thing, because I mean, applying, I'm just looking at all my students' experience around September, October, is so exhausting, you know, to them. So it's a way to take care of yourself and set some boundary.
Thank you. We have a question now about family and thinking about what's going to work best for your whole family unit. Obviously, you're one person within your family, and when you're thinking about moving to a different place or just taking any new job on, it's something that affects the whole system. So thinking about potentially if you're a single parent, if you're have young children, we talked a little bit about how do you think through the climate and kind of assess that before you get there in terms of how supportive it will be of you as an entire person and not just you as the person who's writing fantastic manuscripts. I'm embellishing a little bit there.
Can I take that one? Yeah, so I have a 3-year-old and it has been a tremendous experience. One of the reasons that I actually was also really interested in taking a postdoc there because was I married at the time? I don't remember if I was married or engaged. I think we were married at that time. And just so happenly, my husband, who's not in academia, happened to have a job in the same area. And so it was great. It was like a no-brainer. Let's go. But then that was no longer the case. And so I think it is really, really important to not underestimate the importance of support systems. And oftentimes family is the greatest support system that you can have. But, you know, there are also different support systems that you can have as well, in terms of, you know, there's nothing wrong with seeking out support where you need it. And just also realizing that, you know, sometimes, you know, your family situation does have to come first. So.
Wonderful, thanks very much. Okay, so we have a question also about positions that are at that are non-tenure track positions, or positions that are more teaching focused when you're interested in moving into a more research focused position later on. How do you use your time well to be able to make sure that you're competitive for those more research intensive positions? Especially if you have a role like a field liaison or something like that, where you're really being called on to be out a lot and just managing a lot of administrative work.
Well, like, I mean, that is a very tricky, like, you know, situation. Again, like, you know, I've seen students who move into a teaching position just because of like the circumstances at the time when like they're on the job market. And then later on, they will, like, you know, I mean, try to move back to like a research intensive, like, you know, university. Now, the one thing that I want to share is like, it's actually doable. So it's not impossible. So it's actually like, you know, it's a path. However, if you're going to do that, definitely, like, you know, you do have to make sure, you know, you stay as productive, you know, I mean, in terms of your, I mean, continue building your research, and like, you know, just keep that going, because if, without that, it's very hard to move. So one thing that I also have students have done, you know, before is they moved to a university just because like of maybe geographic location, because of family, like, you know, I mean, Abigail also talked about like a little bit about that one. And so then if you actually move to those type of position, is that a way that you can negotiate with the dean, I mean, to protect some of your time that still allows you to keep like doing the research that will allow you in the future to do something different. So that is a pretty tricky, you know, situation, but it's actually doable, but you have to be very careful. So I would advise, like, I mean, for whoever like thinking about this one, you know, I mean, at the beginning, really exhaust whatever university that you actually, you know, is your top priority first before you move that route.
So one thing that I will add based on my experience as clinical faculty is that in the negotiation when I first accepted the position, and also just in my early time on that job, one thing that I think I did well was to get buy-in from my colleagues that having a strong active research agenda made me better at my teaching roles and made me better at my administrative roles. So if you are looking at a non-tenure track, less research-focused role, I would try and identify the places in that role where being an active researcher makes you stronger. So I had some of my own publications in my course syllabi. I had research colleagues come to be seminar speakers for my students. And I think nobody begrudged me my research time because I was able to integrate that research with my teaching and program management roles. So that may be harder if you're looking at a field director role where you're doing site visits a lot, but if you can identify points of synergy, then get that buy-in from your colleagues and the people who are going to kind of have influence on what your day-to-day is like.
So I think that's the question. That question very fits to my case when I worked in previous institute. So I'd like to share my own experience. So yeah, it is not easy to keep both the juggling. So with the research and teaching and services, yeah, it's a kind of so additional work, hard work. But to me, I was trying to secure a specific time block. For me, I try to keep at least 2 hours every morning to focus on writing papers, focusing on writing grant proposals, focus on reading journal articles. That can be possible because you may change your schedules, and you can just talk with your dean and program director. So what would be best way to keep your time block? And then that help you move forward and keeping going on with research. Also,
with that, we're actually going to have to stop because we're at time. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
This is a wonderful conversation, and I'm going to, all of you, panelists, I hope you don't mind if folks have follow-up questions for you that they reach out. I'm happy to hang out a little bit after we stop recording to chat with anybody who has questions. We had a lot come in, a lot more than we were able to handle in the Q&A session. Thanks very much for submitting your feedback form. If you wouldn't mind, there's a link in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Please join us for session 2, which is in 3 weeks, August the 20th. You do need to register just like today's session, and the link is there. Thank you all very, very much for being here today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take good care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
I can stay on as well if anyone wants to.
Then I think we can probably stop recording. And just in case
Yes,
people want to
thank
hang out
you.
and ask their questions. Yeah, if you don't mind.